If you clicked on this video, you already know that the Wendigo is one of the most chilling monsters in Western folklore. But there's one major detail that the mainstream media has gotten wrong this entire time. A detail that transcends a simple monster story, making the Wendigo something much more disturbing. What if it took root in another culture entirely and tainted an entire people's generational mythology? In this video, we'll be going over the mythology of the real Wendigo. Then we will explore some surprising evidence and a brand new theory. And finally, we'll read a few true stories of Wendigo encounters and experiences. The modern depiction of the Wendigo, as a feral creature with antlers twisting out of its exposed skull and other native embellishments, is actually completely wrong. This representation, all these images, it actually stems from the SCP community as Wendigo Skull, or SCP-323, which is unfortunate because SCP-323 looks really cool. I promise you though, the real Wendigo is still plenty frightening. Watch on to see exactly how, and to see how the Vikings may have encountered Wendigos in North America a millennia ago. The Wendigo is a creature prominent in Native American folklore, presented not as an anthropomorphized deer zombie, but as a force of nature that takes hold of a man or woman who is tempted by greed. The true horror of the proto-Wendigo is not that it is some grotesque and horrific monster, but that it is one that looks just like us. This phenomena, which can be likened to demonic possession, culminates in a catalytic event, some grand sin of greed, most often cannibalism or other graphic murder. As you well know, this creature has been immortalized in popular culture thanks to the likes of Stephen King's Pet Sematary, the TV series Supernatural, and even video games and comic books. The beast of famine, the heart of winter, the ceaseless hunger. The legend of the Wendigo originates with the Algonquin family of language. The Cree tribe, part of the Algonquin family, describe two distinct forms of Wendigo. One as a human, stricken with the cannibalistic urge, and the other as the final form of a Wendigo. With each heinous act, the human vessel deteriorates, while the Wendigo's spirit grows stronger. The body wastes away to skin and bone. A potbelly grows as the Wendigo's hunger does, and the creature grows taller and taller. Eventually, it becomes a towering ghoul that looks something like the typical description of Siren Head. So there's no linguistic distinction between these two forms, but when it's obvious or implied, I'll call the first form a proto-Wendigo and the second form an evolved Wendigo. There's a collection of documented reports and tales entitled Wetiko Accounts of the James Bay Cree. The collection contains accounts of Wetiko or Wendigo encounters since before the turn of the century. There, the Cree tribe told the authors, "The evolved Wendigo is terrifying in appearance, with a heart of ice, enormous strength, and the ability to paralyze humans. It also has the power to transform mortals into cannibals." The evolved Wendigo can allegedly only be overpowered or destroyed by a form of magic called conjuring. The Ojibwa tribe described the evolved Wendigo like this. "It was a large creature, as tall as a tree, with a lipless mouth and jagged teeth. Its breath was a strange hiss, its footprints full of blood, and it ate any man, woman, or child who ventured into its territory, and those were the lucky ones. Sometimes the Wendigo chose to possess a person instead, and then the luckless individual became a Wendigo himself, hunting down those he had once loved and feasting upon their flesh." A proto-Wendigo looks almost human, but with white around the mouth like dry skin, and slightly disheveled. It's also suggested in the accounts that they see humans exclusively as food, as if under a curse. To Native Americans, the Wendigo is like a cautionary tale of corruption and greed. The stories of the Wendigo tell that if someone succumbs to their most primal desires in times of desperation, they will become a monster, and that their hunger, be it for food or anything else, will consume them for all eternity. But such a creature would surely be an allegorical tool in a fable. It surely couldn't exist, could it? Beings of ice and frozen death, they feast upon the flesh of men. Their name translates to devourer, said to be grotesque, greedy, and gluttonous. What may sound like the definition of a Wendigo is actually that of the Jotun of Norse mythology. Is it possible that the Native American tribes weren't the only people to have run-ins with the Wendigo? The short answer is yes. Some 600 years before the first written account of the Wendigo was ever recorded, North America's native tribes faced an equally fearsome visitor. Escaping from their barren lands of Scandinavia, sea-roving plunderers calling themselves Vikings spread far and wide. Eventually, their journey took them to what is now northern Canada and into contact with indigenous Americans. Referred to in the Viking tongue as Skraelinga, or Wretched Ones, have been historically verified to be the ancestors of the Algonquin themselves, to whom the Wendigo legend has been directly linked. Based on the available evidence, historians believe the Viking interaction with the Algonquin began just after the turn of the first millennia and lasted into the 12th century. To the Vikings, this region of modern-day Canada in North America was referred to as Helleland, detailed in the Norse sagas of famed Viking explorer Leif Erikson, who had also attributed the following names to locations in the North American region: Markland, Vinland, and further north, Riseland, the land of giants. Curiously, one of the first tales of a noble hero facing off against a cannibalistic frozen giant can be attributed to the Yngvar's Saga Vidfurla, written by Christian monk Odur Snorrason in, you guessed it, the 12th century. His story tells of a hero named Yngvar, who stumbles upon the house of a horrific giant that consumes human flesh. Another tale from the Halfdanar saga Brennufostra follows the Viking warrior Halfdan, who, after escaping a rival berserker in his father's lands, happens upon Helluland in North America. In the saga, we're told another interesting detail about Helluland, that it was Viking king Ragnar Lothbrok who traveled to Helluland as well to battle giants. Their warship was manned by all sorts of shady characters. There were 15 sons of whores in each rowing bench. Ragnar took control of the wastelands and cleared them of all giants. During a sea voyage, Halfdan is thrown off course and shipwrecked on Helluland, where he happens upon a cave and discovers a giant woman, a frozen monster named Brana, who initially attacks him before revealing that she's been transformed into this monster due to a curse placed on her by a more fearsome giant named Yarnhouse. Exactly as the legend of the Wendigo dictates, Halfdan embarks on a quest to kill Yarnhouse and the rest of his sinister giants, eventually saving Brana and returning home. This story seems to draw a lot of parallels to the Wendigo myth in spite of a very different cultural context. The frozen wilds of Canada, giants, the curse spreading as a sickness, it all seems to indicate that the Vikings saw or heard something in North America. It's important to note that until the 17th or 18th centuries, these sagas were the only evidence of Viking exploration to America. In fact, most believed they were complete fiction until Viking artifacts were discovered in Labrador, Canada. This means there's some more truth to the Norse sagas than initially thought. Historians still question what really happened to the Vikings in North America. Evidence of Viking settlements in North America suggests that their stay on these shores was brief and harsh. Is it possible that they arrived and even these battle-hardened explorers were terrified by what they saw? Sometime around the year 1000 AD, the Vikings land on shores far from home, continuing their westward exploration. Warfaring people by nature, having much more advanced iron weapons. The Vikings should face little resistance from the Native Americans. The elements themselves, however, are harsh, frozen, and frigid, even for the stout Vikings, masters of the other frigid corners of the north. And yet they face resistance from something. In as little as 100 years, they would abandon their only known settlement in the North American continent. Returning to their homeland, they would tell stories of what they saw, what they witnessed here in these lands of the wretched ones. These stories would take such precedence that they would shape Norse culture for the rest of time. Their hell, or hell, is frozen. Their mythological enemies, the Jotun, are frozen, cannibalistic giants. Their Allfather, Odin, adopts the trickster Loki to strike peace with these giants. Loki, adopted in his youth, takes the form of a human, much as a proto-Wendigo might. This map from the 1500s shows the Vikings' understanding of the geography of the northern Atlantic by that time. As you can see, Helluland, the fabled frozen land of giants, is here. According to Wikipedia, this is somewhere near Labrador in Canada. Ultimately, we'll likely never know what truly happened to those Viking explorers, because nearly 2/3 of their population in nearby Iceland was wiped out by plague or famine between the years 1250 and 1700. Did those Viking explorers bring back more than just stories to Iceland? Centuries later, in 1661, French explorers would detail their harrowing journey into Canada towards Lake St. John. Their trek took them past the then furthest explored regions of Canada into the darkness of the unknown. According to a translated letter from one of the Jesuits to the Reverend, Father Hy Rosme Lalamont, the French missionaries were informed that the tribes who'd been summoned to meet with them had been waiting for them, only to succumb to the nightmarish Wendigo curse. Those poor men were seized with an ailment unknown to us, but not very unusual among the people we were seeking. They are afflicted with neither lunacy, hypochondria, nor frenzy, but have a combination of all these species of disease, which affects their imaginations and causes them a more than canine hunger. This makes them so ravenous for human flesh that they pounce upon women, children, and even upon men, like veritable werewolves, and devour them voraciously without being able to appease or glut their appetite, ever seeking fresh prey, and the more greedily, the more they eat. This ailment attacked our deputies, and as death is the sole remedy among those simple people, the afflicted were slain in order to stay the course of their madness. This news might well have arrested our journey if our belief in it had been as strong as the assurance we received of its truth. Our next authenticated historical account comes from 2 centuries later. A man called Swift Runner, or Ka Ki Si Kuchkin in his native tongue, became afflicted in 1878 when a harsh winter caused him to succumb to the whims of the creature and do the unthinkable. Are we filling your craving for stories of the unknown, or is the hunger consuming you? Instead of gnawing on your neighbor, like this video and subscribe, and ring that bell so you can be the first to feast when we deliver new videos every week. Ka Kisi Kuchkin's heavy eyes gazed out over the crowd of onlookers huddled in the freezing rain that fell upon Fort Saskatchewan on December 20th, 1879. They were there to watch him hang. He had declined an offer to speak to a priest, telling the holy man, "The white man has ruined me. I don't think their God would amount to much." The noose was tight around his neck, and the snow fell gently as he uttered his last words before the floor would open underneath him. They were as chilling as the freezing Canadian December. I am no longer a man. Ka Kisi Kuchkin was a man of the Cree tribe, once known as Swift Runner. He died a Wendigo. Once a trader and caravan escort, Swift Runner became a drunk after whiskey was introduced to the Native American communities in Canada. Exiled from the townsfolk around Fort Edmonton in Alberta, Swift Runner was seeking redemption from his family as well, and suggested a hunting trip. In the winter of 1878, Swift Runner took his wife, 6 children, mother-in-law, and brother to a hunting camp north of Fort Saskatchewan. 10 people went to that camp, and 1 would return. Swift Runner appeared around town to be well-fed, healthy-looking, and in good spirits. He claimed that due to weather they were stranded. Food was running scarce. His wife killed herself and the rest died of starvation. The reality was not so light. Complying with the police, Swift Runner would take them to the camp. He showed the police the grave of his eldest son. The bones were undisturbed. Maybe Swift Runner was right. Perhaps, the police thought, he was simply an unfortunate survivor of starvation and desolation. Then they found the other bones. They were scattered around the camp. Some snapped in half, suggesting that they had been splintered in half so the marrow could be sucked dry from them. They'd found a pot of human fat as well. Swift Runner's story was quickly taking a dark turn. Then they uncovered the skulls of Swift Runner's wife and mother-in-law. A moccasin had been shoved into the skull of his mother-in-law, a sewing needle still dangling from the unfinished work. Swift Runner then told the officers what had really happened. They started as nightmares, he said. He was being told in his sleep by the Wendigo to kill his family, to eat them. The voices wouldn't stop, he said. Then the spirit took over. It took control of his body and brutally murdered his family, cooking and eating them. Unequivocally dismissing the angle of the supernatural, the police couldn't believe that he would resort to killing and eating his family out of hunger. Emergency food supplies were less than 25 miles away. Through the trial, Swift Runner maintained that it was a case of possession. He was tried by a jury of 3 English-speaking Cree, 4 white men well-versed in the Cree language, and 1 full-blooded Cree translator. Swift Runner said the voices began as he and his family returned from a moose hunt. All he could hear was young moose, nothing but moose. Young moose, nothing but moose. Local gossip said Swift Runner had developed a taste for human flesh from years earlier when he was forced to eat the remains of a hunting partner to save his life. Other people believe he had been possessed by a Wendigo. The Wendigo legend continued into the opening years of the 20th century. The remarkable history of the Hudson Bay Company was published and made special note of the Wendigo legend. The story of the Wendigo was an alarming one. No crew would push on after the sun was set, lest they should see this apparition. Some said he was a spirit, condemned to wander to and fro in the earth on account of crimes committed. Others believed the Wendigo was a desperate outcast who had tasted human flesh and prowled about at night. Tales were told of unlucky trappers who had disappeared in the woods and had never been heard of again. The same year the history of the Hudson Bay Company was published, a man named Jack Fiddler was arrested for the murder of what was allegedly a Wendigo. The name might seem familiar to the pop culture savvy. A character named Jack Fiddler was featured prominently in the TV series Supernatural as a demon hunter. His name was also given to a Wendigo killer in the PlayStation game Until Dawn. Fiddler was a Cree Indian, a shaman, who claimed to have defeated over 14 Wendigo in his time. Locals would call upon him to exorcise loved ones who they thought had succumbed to the curse of the Wendigo. While legends of the Wendigo are now known worldwide, the only verifiable evidence of such a creature existing is in the Canadian regions. The tribes held this beast to such regard that a dance was allegedly conducted before great winters and during periods of drought and famine, where the dancers would wear special masks and dance backwards around a drum to reinforce the importance of the legend of the Wendigo. So what do you think? Was it a fairy tale fable told to children to stop them from eating their friends and siblings? Was it a folk story that spread from the Native Americans to the Vikings? Or was it something a little more sinister? Let me know in the comments, and thanks for watching Dark Frontier.